I commend this bill to the House.
Mr Chair.
Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Chair. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia ora. I rise to speak on part 2 of this bill, the Marine Legislation Bill. I want to talk about two SOPs in particular, two amendments. The first is SOP 347, which introduces new clause 102A. Now, I don't want to bore anyone watching parliamentary TV with a whole bunch of jargon and numbers. What this amendment does is gives Kiwi no say when it comes to consenting exploratory wells in all of New Zealand's deep water. Why? Because the government doesn't want to give Kiwis a say. Why? Because they don't like what they'll hear. The fact is, Mr Chair, New Zealanders don't want to risk our environment and economy from risky deep-sea drilling, risky exploratory drilling, which they saw in the Gulf of Mexico from an exploratory well 1.5 kilometres down, which we know we could see drilling twice as deep in New Zealand's waters. They don't want to see that, and that's why the government in this amendment is shutting away their ability to have a say. Now, it's embarrassing for the Minister to have to be amending this bill. I mean, this is legislation which Parliament passed last year, legislation relating to a consenting regime in New Zealand's exclusive economic zone. And here's the government having to change it again only a year later, and they're doing it through a back door. Instead of doing it through a normal select committee process, where an amendment would have its due diligence from a Human Rights Bill of Rights Act vet, this government's introducing it through a back door, through an amendment to take away Kiwis' right to discretionary exploratory drilling. It's just not on, Mr Speaker. It's a Kiwi way that we should have a say. It's deeply ironic that this government, in partnership with Dulux, is going to ask Kiwis what colour they should be painting dock huts, of course in Dulux paint, but not what they think about deep-sea exploratory drilling. This is an activity which could affect all of us. In the Gulf of Mexico, we saw 600,000 tonnes of oil enter their environment. Makes the arena look like a puddle. 300 tonnes had a huge impact on the taxpayers' books, on the local economy, on the local citizenry, yet here we are looking at potentially 600,000 tonnes of oil, and the government want to do it without giving the public any sort of say. I'd like to ask the Minister what she's worried about, what she's scared about from hearing from the people of New Zealand. I'm curious as to why in the Minister's exploratory statement they say the amendment requires the Minister, when recommending whether regulation should provide for a discretionary activity to be non-notified, to take into account the desirability of allowing the public to be heard. The desirability about allowing the public to be heard. Mr Speaker, I find this language incredible. It's anti-New Zealand, it's anti-our values, and it shouldn't be going through this backdoor sneaky path, Mr Chair. What we've seen, of course, is this is a pattern of this government, and in particular in the energy and resources sector. We saw the Minister Bridges, in an embarrassing display of poor lawmaking, have to amend the Crown Minerals Amendment Bill. We had the Crown Minerals Amendment Bill in front of this House, now it's an Act, which saw the Anadarko Amendment, which took away Kiwis' right to protest at sea, an honourable Kiwi tradition which we're seeing a process of this government circumventing normal legislative due diligence, good process, and it's all for the outcome, which is to support the oil industry and the extractive economy in New Zealand. It goes to the heart of the government's drill it, mine it, frack it approach to economic development. There's no economic strategy, there's no plan, there's no innovation, there's no looking to the future. It's simply hoping someone will find something, they won't leave too much of a mess as they get it out, and we'll clip the ticket, albeit with the fourth lowest tax and royalty rate in the world for oil and gas. Now, Mr Speaker, the Green Party has a clear position when it comes to deep-sea oil drilling. With our amendment, we'd rather see deep-sea exploratory drilling made a prohibited activity. That's what more than 99% of the submitters to the Select Committee wanted. Not this non-notified discretionary activity class, a prohibited activity. And I hear from the Labour Party, they talk about deep-sea drilling an awful amount, but I still don't hear what their position is on this bill. Also in Part 2 of the Act, we have a new amendment 363, introduced by myself. This amendment enacts the recommendation of the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, which would introduce a new clause to Part 2, which would amend the Exclusive Economic Zone Act to simply make seabed mining in benthic protected areas prohibited. Because at the moment we have the inconsistent situation where bottom trawlers can't trawl within 100 metres of the seabed, dredgers can't dredge the seabed, but we see mining companies granted permits by this government to literally vacuum up the seabed in benthic protected areas. It makes a mockery of our marine protection laws to allow this, Mr Chair. So
Gareth Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'll be very brief because I need to get to Business Committee. But in my amendment 363, it simply means that benthic protected areas are actually protected. I think if you can't trawl and you can't dredge, you shouldn't be able to literally vacuum up the seabed. I think most New Zealanders would agree with me. It's akin to Schedule 4, Mr Speaker, where New Zealanders stood up and said some parts of our country are off limits, some parts of our country have intrinsic value. And in fact, when you look at an economic opinion of it, in fact, we're stronger and more prosperous as a country having protected areas on land. When it comes to sea, we've only got 0.41%. That's less than half of 1%, protected and marine protected areas, and the government shouldn't be allowing mining of benthic protected areas. Now again, I'd like to issue a challenge to the Labour Party. I'd like to see them support this bill. I don't think the Labour Party stands for mining marine protected areas, Mr Speaker. I don't think their members want to see a Labour Party voting for mining marine protected areas and seeing an inconsistent approach. So the challenge is that the Labour Party, the votes will be cast and they can make their opinion. They can cast their votes and the choice is their way. But let's hope that the Labour Party members send the Labour Party a clear message, which when it comes to deep sea drilling, let's not just hear talk, let's see some walk as well. Let's see a strong position. And when it comes to seabed mining, let's not mine marine protected areas, Labour. And what we can see as a greater prosperity for all of our economy, focusing on that clean green brand, Mr Speaker. But all in all, what we see in the Minister's amendment is a backdoor way to take away Kiwis' right to have a say. Deeply un-New Zealand, Mr Speaker, deeply disappointing, and that's why the Green Party will be voting against this amendment. Kia ora.
Moana Meki.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm just going to take a short call just because I forgot to mention the SOP from the Green member, Gary.